Hi, this is Jennifer Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I'm delighted to have back Justin Wolfers, who is a professor at University of Michigan. You could probably tell by the hat on the wall. It's great to have you back to talk all things economics. There was recently a report out by a group called the Organization, for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is one of these big international organizations, that said world growth is slowing down. The economies are slowing down. Why is that happening? And is this because of things the current administration in Washington, D.C. is doing, or are there other factors?
Okay, so the OECD, first of all, what that is that's just the rich country club. And the rich country club, everyone throws a few dollars in and says, we'll buy some economists who will analyze what it's like to be a rich country. So maybe think about that as the therapist for rich countries, because they often have recommendations. In this case, they're releasing their latest forecast. Their latest forecast in rich countries are a big chunk of global GDP, so they forecast what's happening to the world. And their forecast got a bit more glum over the past few months. Now, that's not remotely difficult to understand. Look around you. Read a newspaper. Notice the fact that right now you're doing something, the audience, that you probably wish you didn't have to do, which is listening to an economist. If times were good, when my teeth are good, I don't go see my dentist, and when your life is good, you don't bother listening to an economist. So everyone has been cutting their forecast for American growth and for global growth quite substantially. So next time you wonder, does any of this matter? Realize this little marble of ours has 8 billion people on it, and their living standards are going to be measurably lower as a result of all of the circus that we'll spend the rest of this podcast talking about. What's going on? I think the most obvious thing that's going on is, of course, the Trump tariffs. Those tariffs, to be clear, you might think, well, of course they hit the rest of the world. If we're America first, of course we're going to clobber them and help us. No, that's not right. They hurt us and they hurt them. So the first thing is that it's going to slow world growth. It's going to slow American growth too. Second thing is this set of tariffs has been unbelievably chaotic in the way they've been implemented. It doesn't have to be this painful. It doesn't have to impose these costs. If you've got any friends or family who work in business, you'll probably notice they've been spending a few extra hours at the office, and they've been worrying about tariffs, and they've been worrying about supply chains, and they've been worrying where their customers come from. Even me, like I'm a nerdy academic, you might think I'm untouched by this, but it turns out that some of the folks that I lecture to are international students who bring a lot of money when they cross the border. And when they're not bringing that money, the University of Michigan has to make changes. So the sudden chaotic nature is a second shock. And I really do think there's a third shock going on, which is a crisis of confidence in the competence of one of the world's great economies. If the bloke at the front of the wheel with the steering wheel in his hand of one of the major engines of growth appears to be steering like this and may even hit the brake or even put us in reverse at any moment, that causes people to take a lot of defensive actions. I've heard from lots of people who tell me that they're putting off making major purchases right now. It's not just Americans doing that either, by the way. And that in turn means there'll be less spending to support future demand through the economy. So in the language of economics, we think about tariffs as being a shock to supply, raises the costs on suppliers, but chaos and uncertainty is a shock to demand. And so if there's one thing you don't like, don't worry, we've got two things you don't like instead.
So we're hiding under the bed, and people who are trying to lure us out are hesitant to do so because they don't know what's going on. Not a happy situation. There's also a lot of talk about a bond crisis. Jamie Dimon raised it. You pick up any kind of financial newspaper, they talk about a bond crisis. What is a bond crisis, and are we about to experience one? And would that be a bad thing?
Okay, so much there. What I'm going to do is take a few things in turn. First of all, just because Jamie Dimon agrees with me this time does not mean that I'm going to endorse Jamie Dimon. So I'm just going to take Jamie Dimon first, if I may. Jamie Dimon spent all of 2023 saying the US economy was about to enter a recession. He then spent the first half. So Jamie Dimon, he spent all of 2022 doing that too. And for some reason, every time a bloke who's always wrong says something out loud, it still makes the front page of the papers. It may be because he's running America's biggest bank. But let's not fool ourselves that this is a divine oracle. He may not be wrong this time, but boy, he's been wrong a few times. So, hey, Jamie.
I don't see you getting a job with the Jamie Dimon organization anytime soon, but that's okay.
I'm happy to work for him at the going rate that he pays his
Yes,
bankers.
might give him some better advice.
Yeah, I'd give him a call for. Wow, he earns a lot. Okay. Is there a looming bond market crisis coming? Here's the problem with crises. You can never predict them. See, if you knew one was going to happen next Thursday, you'd start selling today. So if you know everyone's going to start selling off on Thursday, I'm going to start selling today. And Jen, if you start thinking, well, Justin's going to start selling today, what are you going to do? You're going to try and sell before me. And so anytime we're sure there's a crisis coming on Thursday, it unravels and we end up having the crisis on Monday. Which therefore means that anytime anyone says there's a crisis coming in the future, they're not certainly wrong, but there's not a lot we want to put into that, right? Because if Jamie Dimon is right that the foundations for a crisis are obvious and clear, I don't understand what he thinks all the smart people on Wall Street are doing, leaving their money in bonds, waiting for it all to disappear next Thursday. Crises are inherently difficult to predict. So anytime someone confidently tells you there's a crisis coming, that's when that's the first failure of the charlatan test. I don't want to be harsh on Jamie. It's a common media trope, and it's the easiest way to get headlines saying, I alone know a crisis is coming. So let's not take that too seriously. Now let's come back. Is the risk of a crisis high? There, I think there's a reasonable answer. So look, here's the reality. For most of my life, for all of my lifetime, investing money in the United States has been seen as a safe bet. Buying what are called treasury bonds, which is essentially lending money to the US federal government, has been understood to be the safest asset in the world. Now, part of that is convention, because if I think it's safe and I think that you think it's safe, then if you see that I have a lot of bonds, you're not going to suddenly call in the existing loans you have to me. So there's a sense of we all choose to believe this is true. And if you believe it and I believe it, and I believe that you believe it, and I believe that you believe that I believe it, and on it goes, that can be quite stable. Of course, one day you might just wake up and say, hey, the emperor's got no clothes. At a deep level, that's sort of how bank runs normally operate, and it's also how a bond market crisis might operate. So should we think about the US lending money to the US government as being the safest thing to do with your money? I don't know. I mean, I have views. We are in a lot of debt right now. Is it too much? I don't know. It's about 100% of GDP. Japan's got about 200%, and Japan's doing okay. Having said that, there are other countries with names like Greece and Argentina that have played this game before, and it hasn't ended well for them. So anyone who tells you they're certain they know that we can't sustain this is wrong. Anyone who says there's no risk is wrong. So I would look a step further and I'd say, well, can we sustain this? Do I worry about creditors getting stiffed? Is this a stable White House? Is this one that would do something that no previous administration has ever done? Kind of might be. Is this a Congress willing to stand up to crazy ideas that might emanate from the brain of one old man? So far, it's not. So our checks and balances and our fiscal, aren't as strong as they would be. We normally think about checks and balances in other respects, but when it comes to fiscal policy here, you've got a large debt, but more than that, you've currently got an administration that's not taking it seriously. That the usual approach to fiscal policy is we try and sock a little away in good times so that we can really help the economy if there's a pandemic, if there's a global financial crisis, if there's an oil shock. Right now, we're talking about increasing the deficit from historically very high rates in an economy that we believe is still, knock on wood, pretty good. So that seems to be the opposite. And so if you're not going to start paying down the debt today, when exactly? And so it's those sort of, it's the intersection of political and economic risks that make one worry a little bit. And so then, Jen, you asked, what is a fiscal crisis? And so let me just describe the problem. So we're actually in a really happy place right now, which is the rest of the world still believes we're pretty reliable. So they charge us very low interest rates. Because we're charged very low interest rates, it's not very hard to meet the equivalent of our monthly mortgage payment. If one day they decide, I'm not sure about these guys, I think it's kind of risky. If they decide it's risky, they'll jack up the interest rates. If they jack up the interest rates, suddenly it's hard to meet our payments. So they jacked up the interest rates because they were worried it would be hard for us to pay. And because they jacked up the interest rates, it became hard for us to pay. This has happened in many countries before. And so there's a good virtuous cycle. There's a vicious cycle. And if interest rates went high enough, fast enough, it would be hard to pay. I also, Jen, I meant to pause and let you ask questions. I'm sorry. So how about you say, tell me how big these interest rate problems should be, and then I'll answer it.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. The dollars here are enormous. So we owe about $29 trillion. Well, actually, let me put it in more human terms. If you've ever calculated your family mortgage, what would it be if the interest rate went up by 50%? Sorry, half a percentage point. You know that when you owe a lot of money, 0.5% raises your monthly payment a lot. So let's do that math for our national debt. So we owe about $29 trillion. And so therefore, if that payment rose by about 0.5 of a percentage point, I think that comes out to round about, what is 0.5? So 1% of 29 trillion is 290 billion. Let's call that 300 billion. So therefore, 0.5% is 150 billion. You might say, well, why? I still don't know what that number means. If Trump's tariff revenue fantasies come true, they'll raise about 300 billion. So if interest rates rise by 0.5 percentage point, they'll eat half of the tariff revenue. If they rise by 1 percentage point, they'll eat all of it. That's why you should care about the bond market. All of this tariff stuff will be for nothing. Won't raise a penny if it causes the interest rate in our national debt to rise by a percentage point.
That, I think, is the best explanation I have heard of the problem to date. Let me switch gears and talk about another own goal. We were talking about football a moment ago, so this is the ultimate own goal, and that is salvaging what has been an incredibly productive relationship between the federal government and research institutes, scientists at elite universities. People come from all over the world to do their research here.
Yep.
These institutions have had breakthroughs in a whole variety of science and technology. And now Donald Trump has decided, for whatever reason, we're going to savage them, we're going to punish them and cut them off. How big a problem could this be, long-term or short-term? And are we killing the goose that laid the golden egg?
Yes. Okay. What I want to start by doing actually is explaining how the system works, if I may. And then, Jen, when I get through that and I forget the second half of your question, remind me to answer the question why this matters. So you might be surprised when you read these headlines that say the US government is cutting off billions of dollars from Harvard. And you're like, oh, those elites, the US government's paying them billions of dollars. I don't even like those guys. So I want you to, I think it's really important for the audience to understand what's going on there. So any society always, from the dawn of time, well, since we got out of subsistence, has devoted time to to research and development, creating new ideas. Sometimes it's the arts and we have better symphonies, but sometimes it's material science and we have new materials with which we can build houses or make clothes and so on. So there's a bunch of research and development that will never ever be done by the private sector because it's not profitable. It will eventually have profitable implications, but you can't, if you invent something, say a new algorithm, that will get used by Google, but it'll also get used by Facebook, and it'll also get used by a whole bunch of other companies. And so therefore you won't get rich. That's the problem. This is fundamental science, like new mathematical theorems, new approaches to statistics. They have so many uses beyond your life that the full set of benefits of your discovery will never come back to you, therefore we won't invest enough of them. And this is the idea that in economics we call it public good. So therefore governments subsidize research because we realize it will help everyone who gets to use those fundamental discoveries. Now, there's two ways it could do it. The government could have an army of scientists. We could have nerds in buildings all along the Washington Mall. Thousands of nerds in lab coats and spectacles and pocket protectors, and we'd call that the American Scientific, I don't know, Strike Force. It'd be really cool. But there's also a view that was very popular in Republican circles that you should stick to your core competencies. The government should do what it's good at and pay others to do what others are good at. So instead of doing the science, we pay for others to do the science for us. Same way as I don't have a cow in my backyard. So instead of producing milk, I live in Ann Arbor, a milkman who still drops milk at my house. It's more efficient. He's much better at milking cows than I am, right? So this is make versus buy. The federal government has decided it's better off to buy scientific research than to make it itself. We could expand the federal government and do it ourselves, but we're not. So what it does then is it says, just like any private sector company, when they have like new IT needs, they put out a contract for tender. And they say to all the different IT firms, hey, who'd like to bid on this contract? Who thinks they can do this most effectively and most cheaply will accept offers. That's how science works in the United States. The National Institute of Health says we need to discover a cure for cancer, but we don't have an army of nerds. But I know there's nerds out there, so what I'm going to do is ask some nerds to bid on the cancer to feeding contract. Those nerds work for universities. And then what the National Institute of Health does is it appoints an expert board that reads through all those and comes back and says, hey, I think these are the guys who can give us the most bang for our buck in trying to cure breast cancer. And they give them a research grant. They're not giving money to Harvard. They're not helping Harvard undergraduates. They're paying the salaries of Harvard researchers to do the research the federal government wants done. The federal government wants it done because it helps us. We hate breast cancer. Leaving the private market to solve breast cancer hasn't worked and won't work. Okay, so that's what all the money going to Harvard is about. It's about the privatization of science. We privatized it. The government doesn't do it. The government pays for it. And these happen to be the private sector organizations that are bidding on it. So what the president has recently done when he's cut Harvard off is he said, let's put this out to tender. But if the world's smartest scientist and the world's most efficient scientist happens to be at Harvard, I want you to choose the second most effective instead. Literally spending our money less effectively because he hates Harvard. Jen, I said that was the background. I just wanted to explain what's going on with research and development here.
Yes.
Okay. Why does it matter? Great. So this is the hardest part of keeping track of things in our current environment. As an economist, I'm often asked what's going to happen to GDP next quarter? What will happen to unemployment next month? Are we currently in a recession? This is looking out 1, 2, 3 months. And if it's a particularly sophisticated journalist, they'll ask me to look out 1 year. But that limits what we focus on, and it limits it in really painful ways. So economists in a quiet moment step back and we ask deeper questions. We say, why is the year 2025 so much richer than the year 1500? Or we ask, why is America richer than Argentina? And why is Argentina richer than Papua New Guinea? And when you ask these big picture questions, you start to realize that anything that would turn the United States into Argentina or Argentina into Papua New Guinea is the most important question. Because if our level of material well-being was equal to that of Argentina, there would be children who are hungry. There would be less to go around. And if you think families are struggling today, my word, believe me, we'd be struggling. Why do I use Argentina as an example? Because 100 years ago, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world. And if you were looking for economists to take bets on who is going to dominate the 21st century, you would have said, well, is it going to be the United Kingdom? Is it going to be the United States? Is it going to be Argentina? So this can happen. We can fail. So now the question is, what makes the United States richer than Argentina? And I don't just mean richer in money. We have better education system. We have less inequality. We have better healthcare, and on it goes. And the deep answer from economists is it depends on how many people you got. That helps determine how much stuff we make, right? How many machines you've got, we call that capital. The people that you have, how well trained they are, we call that human capital, you call that education. And we think of those as the raw ingredients that we put in the metaphorical mixing bowl. But there's one more thing. What ideas do we have? And you can think about ideas as being, what are the recipes that we can use to transform these raw ingredients into the stuff we really care about, people and machines, into artificial intelligence and new materials and vaccines. And those ideas are the product of research and development. And so that's the point. Why is the world so rich today relative to 1500? Back in 1500, we had a fair few people. We didn't have a lot of capital, but that wasn't the problem. What we didn't have is cures to, we didn't have vaccines, we didn't have advanced materials, we didn't have machine learning, we didn't have artificial intelligence. We would go to the beach back then and see this stuff on the beach called sand that's made of silicon. And what we used to do is build sandcastles out of it. Now we build supercomputers. And the only difference between those two societies is the know-how and knowledge to stop building sandcastles and start building supercomputers. So we need research and development in order to make sure the next generation has richer, fuller lives than the last one. And the thing is, the discovery that sand can become a supercomputer is one that the private sector does not have enough incentives to do by itself. So therefore, there needs to be a government role in this. And so, yes, failing to do research on the next cure for cancer is going to cost us. What? Could cost us nothing, because it could be those scientists were never going to discover anything, but maybe they were about to discover the cure for cancer. And if we don't give those blokes jobs, we don't get the cure. Our lives today are miraculous in ways that our grandparents could never have imagined. They used to go to the bathroom in a stall out the back of their houses, and we discovered indoor plumbing. Their grandparents used to spend much of their evenings doing very little because we didn't have light. They had to use candles. And the thing that moved us from candles to LEDs is research and development. All right, so I care a lot about that, so I apologize. I might have gone on a bit just then.
And I would suggest the other thing is that we allow the best and the brightest from around the world to come and bring their ideas and their expertise. And when we're also cutting off that, and in fact, sending foreign students away, chasing professors out the door, we are adding really fuel to the fire of burning our entire economy down. So I would suggest that it's not just this one thing, but it seems like a whole series of things, from tariffs to immigration to research development to the rule of law, by the way, which is another thing that separates us from Argentina, that if we keep kicking it in our own goal, we're going to lose the game. You have informed me that the sign below behind you believe will be known to people who appreciate the metaphor of an own goal. And it is, of course, a Ted Lasso-ism. And I think we should come away with the notion that we can do a lot better if we stop doing bad things to ourselves. And that we have such capabilities in this country. We have such potential if we don't screw it up. So thank you as always for
I don't
coming to
normally
it.
deal in political slogans, but the following has occurred to me, which is my understanding of American exceptionalism was always about aspiration. And I think that's a much better recipe than resentment. I just want to leave you with that.
Perfectly said. Thanks so much, Justin. We'll look forward to seeing you back again. Take care.